In the space of a single generation, we've gone from this to this.
Watching the footage of the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, I was struck by how not fat everyone in the crowd was. We looked like a completely different race of people.
The heart attacks, the strokes, the cancer, the blindness, the amputations, all of that, I think, is unnecessary suffering that we're causing people.
The question is, where did this come from and why is it occurring? When I was in medical school, type 2 diabetes happened only in older adults. Now we see it in kids as young as 3 years old. And the more we try to medicate our way out of the disease, the worse it seems to get.
You can't throw drugs at a dietary disease and expect to make it better. But that's the medical teaching. Hey, you have type 2 diabetes, let me give you some pills.
The model doesn't work. We're not making people healthy, we're just treating disease. But if you give people good nutrition, they become very healthy.
He introduced that keto diet, and 6 weeks later, it was like a miracle. No diabetes.
And it was like magic. And I got completely off of insulin.
2 years later, I had lost 197 pounds.
Problem is, we've been confused and downright brainwashed by decades of nutritional dogma, the almost religious conviction that fat is bad, especially saturated animal fats.
You can lose weight on these animal protein Atkins-type diets, but you're mortgaging your health in the process.
We still operate under this idea of dogmatic principles. We've always done it that way. That's what we've always said. We're going to continue to say it. And unfortunately, nothing is holding back progress in nutrition science like dogma.
Alternative ideas have been attacked, and physicians labeled as quacks for ignoring guidelines against fats and telling patients to cut carbs instead. In South Africa, Dr. Tim Noakes went through a 4-year ordeal that threatened his medical license for recommending a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet to a young mother.
The reason why the low-carbohydrate diet has become demonized is because it works, and it has a huge impact on the financial return of the medical profession.
I'm an internal medicine specialist. I can treat all of the conditions that I used to treat with medications just by changing the food. It's remarkable.
It's completely free. There's no special equipment. There's no special, surgeries. It's a completely natural, and it's been used for thousands of years.
I can treat not only obesity, but I can treat type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. In fact, I have to take away medications from people as they get better.
This is as big as the discovery of insulin or antibiotics. It clearly is.
My interpretation is that low-fat diets can work, but low-carb diets work better. And that's what the science says.
Type 2 diabetes, we were always taught, is a chronic and irreversible disease, inevitably progressive. I flatly reject that. I flatly reject it. So it is chronic, irreversible, and inevitably progressive if you take the guidelines currently in place and utilize them as your treatment plan.
For years, the American Diabetes Association has promoted low-fat diets. They use this handy graphic illustration called the diabetic plate, which features limited amounts of lean meat, non-fat dairy products, and 50% or more of daily calories as carbohydrates.
I think the diabetic plate is a prescription for worsening of the disease. If you really look at the diabetic plate, it is 3/4 carbohydrates, which makes no sense. It also is lean protein. So when we look at the diabetic plate as a whole, there's almost no fats.
This is a way to make people sicker and fatter. This is the advice I was giving. This is the advice that doesn't work. This is the advice that prescribes more medications. This is the advice that increases insulin.
But really, it's a metabolic shift when you burn fat instead of burning sugar.
Alyssa Gallagher is Judy's dietitian. She was initially trained in the low-fat paradigm.
When I first started exploring the low-carb approach,
That's really low carb. I can use that.
I helped people genuinely for the first time in my career.
I'm going for real food now so I can get rid of all of this.
In the old days, I was frustrated that the advice I was giving wasn't working for people.
Oh, chips and crackers. Where's that garbage can?
I was taught essentially what the American Diabetes Association teaches is carbohydrates, consistent carbohydrates, more whole grain.
No oatmeal. They used to tell us that was good for you.
I was taught saturated fat is bad for you. Saturated fat is something to be avoided and limited at all costs.
The problem is, when you remove fat from the diet, you have to eat something else instead. And that something else is often carbohydrates.
At first, I didn't understand why the advice I was giving wasn't working. It's what I learned in school. I'm the nutrition expert, right? It should be working. And then eventually it started not making sense to me. Why am I telling somebody with diabetes that they must eat carbohydrates? It didn't make any sense. Carbohydrates raise blood sugar. When you have higher blood sugars, we need to give you more medication. When we give you more medication, you gain weight. When you gain weight, you need more medication. You want to eat more carbs. It became a vicious cycle.
Okay, I think I'm done cleaning out my pantry.
And insulin resistance is essentially a state of carbohydrate intolerance. So why, oh why, do we want to continue to recommend to people to eat them?
Sarah Hallberg is a physician leading arguably the most promising trial ever conducted on type 2 diabetes. She has helped hundreds of patients safely and sustainably reverse their diabetes diagnosis, often getting off all medications by cutting carbohydrates and increasing their fat intake a lot, to as much as 70 to 80% of their daily calories.
The solution to the diabetes epidemic in my clinic is exceedingly clear. Stop using medicine to treat food.
Her TED Talk on this unconventional approach has nearly 5 million views. The title, Reversing Type 2 Diabetes, starts with ignoring the guidelines.
Fat is central to any science-based nutrition recommendation for anyone who struggles with type 2 diabetes. Carbohydrates cause our insulin and glucose to go up, proteins much less, and with fat, there's no glucose or insulin reaction. And given the fact that type 2 diabetes is a problem with elevated glucose, wait a minute, we can't be recommending the macronutrient that's going to cause glucose and insulin to go up. But that's exactly what MyPlate and the ADA guidelines do. They recommend us to eat the macronutrient that's causing the problem.
In her clinical trial of nearly 500 patients, 60% of the intervention group reversed their diagnosis of diabetes. That's more than half the patients whose blood sugars normalized. 94% had their insulin doses decreased or totally eliminated, with no increase in their LDL or lousy cholesterol. By comparison, the American Diabetes Association reports a less than 1% success rate at reversing diabetes when following their own low-fat advice.
So if we want people to really get help, we have to start giving them advice that actually works.
It's hard when you have, let alone been hearing something for decades, but been saying something for decades. It's difficult to turn that ship around. Because to turn that ship around, you have to be vulnerable. You have to say, I was wrong. And this involves a lot of organizations, a lot of people saying I was wrong. And I think that's hard. I think that's a big deal.
After years of following the guidelines and getting nowhere, Judy has decided to ignore the ADA's advice and try to reverse her type 2 diabetes with a low-carb, high-fat nutrition plan.
The health professionals that were giving us all that advice through the years just kind of bounced us back and forth, and we never really had any answers.
I really like just unsweetened coconut chips.
I feel like what I'm learning now is a way toward health and a way toward a better size that I'll feel good about, which to me is hand in hand with my health.
But two of the three.